And in tonight's episode of How Weird is Mitt Romney? Mitt Romney has a thing for men in uniform. He has always wanted to be one. No, not that kind of uniform. And no, not that kind of uniform. Nope, not a military uniform. Mitt Romney's fetish is police uniforms. This one is his favorite, the Michigan State Trooper uniform. That's the Michigan State Trooper uniform circa 1966. When Mitt Romney wasn't gay-bashing kids whose hair he didn't like, Mitt Romney's other favorite sick thing to do was to impersonate a police officer. In an exclusive article just released tonight by the National Memo, details emerge of a Mitt Romney who, as a college freshman at Stanford University, allegedly admitted to fellow dorm mates that he sometimes disguised himself as a police officer, and laid out on his bed was a Michigan State Trooper's uniform. One of the people who saw the uniform said he told us that he had gotten the uniform from his father, George Romney, then the governor of Michigan, whose security detail was staffed by uniformed troopers. He told us that he was using it to pull over drivers on the road. He also had a red flashing light that he would attach to the top of his white Rambler. We thought it was all pretty weird. We all thought, wow, that's pretty creepy. And after that, we didn't have much interaction with him. Hundreds of thousands of men Mitt Romney's age got uniforms in those days the old-fashioned way, by being drafted into military service. Mitt Romney avoided that with 4 consecutive draft deferments that he obtained that allowed him to, like his father before him and his sons after him, avoid combat in the war of his era, the Vietnam War. Joining me now on Mitt Romney's love-hate relationship with uniforms, Joe Conason, editor-in-chief of thenationalmemo.com, and John Soltz, chairman of VoteVets.org. Well, Joe Conason, you have the single weirdest report about Mitt Romney so far in this campaign year. This is as strange a thing as I've read. And what was the legality of that Mitt Romney was flirting with by using this uniform that his father got for him?
Well, Lawrence, our research shows that impersonating a police officer is at least a misdemeanor in both California, where he went to college for a couple of years at Stanford, and in Michigan, where he was in high school, apparently doing the same thing, according to reports in The Real Romney by the 2 Boston Globe reporters and in the New Republic in 2008. If you do it more than once in those states, it becomes a felony. And he seems to have possibly done this more than once. So if he had been caught, he would have been in a lot of trouble putting on a state police uniform and pretending to be a state police officer. Just by putting on the uniform, if you're not doing it for a theatrical presentation, you are committing a crime in the state of Michigan. You know, you could go to prison for a year, possibly longer, pay a big fine, and have a big blotch on your record. But worse than that, from the point of view of Robin Madden, who spoke to me about this, who was in his dorm at Stanford, they all thought this was bizarre, and were creeped out by it, as you said.
Joe, I have a feeling that if he had gotten caught in the state of Michigan in that uniform, there was a phone call he could have made that would have gotten him out of trouble pretty fast.
Yes, and, you know, I mean, yes, his dad was the governor, and I guess one doesn't like to think of special justice for special people, but he probably would have been able to get out of it. I don't know that he ever actually put the uniform on in California, went around. It would have been even stranger to be driving around California in a Michigan State Trooper's uniform in your white Rambler. But, yes, I guess if he had been caught, he would have gotten away with it. But he apparently did this and didn't get caught.
John Soltz, this brings up, by proximity, especially in time, the uniforms that so many men Mitt Romney's age were wearing at that time. We showed photographs at the beginning of this segment of John Kerry in his military uniform at the time, of Bob Kerry in his military uniform, John McCain, all who went on to be members of the United States Senate. What do you make of Mitt Romney's avoidance at that time of doing his military duty, especially as someone who was publicly in favor of both the draft and the Vietnam War?
Well, I think it's simple. I mean, obviously, the Associated Press has been digging in on this, and the article's been floating around a lot of publications, but it's real simple. I mean, Mitt Romney didn't go to Vietnam because Mitt Romney didn't want to go. And yes, he did go to Europe. He served his church there on a mission. I personally have no problem with that. I mean, a tremendous amount of people of his faith have served our country honorably. But he did get a deferment in 1965, where he at that point was for the war and against the protesters. And then later on he came home and he got another deferment. And he basically waited this thing out over a 5-year period until the draft essentially changed in 1969. His lottery number came up basically at like a number 300. So, you know, it's a question of entitlement, and this is sort of the core issue that affects him. He didn't serve because he didn't really want to, and you know, at the time he was for the war. In 1994, when he ran for the United States Senate, he was then against the war, and then now in 2007, he again wished he had served in Vietnam, but solely he didn't go to Vietnam just because he felt he was entitled and didn't need to.
John, I was in high school during this period and watched the draft end, actually. My number would have come up, except they ended the draft before I got there. And I can tell you, people who weren't around during that era, there wasn't a single able-bodied man in America who wanted to go to Vietnam who didn't. Everyone else avoided it, including all of my older brothers and everybody in my neighborhood. There were a couple of people who went, and everyone else did everything they possibly could to avoid it. Many, as a matter of conscience, refusing to participate in what they believed was an unjust war. Many as a matter of cowardice. Many as a matter of a combination of conscience and cowardice. The willingness to go into combat is rare among men anywhere, and it's very rare among men in this country, and there wasn't a single willing person left behind during Vietnam.
Well, I mean, in my generation, the people who I served with in Iraq, I mean, we're the volunteer force, so plenty of us don't agree with the way the president's handling Afghanistan right now. Plenty of us didn't agree with the Iraq war, and we still went. So boo-woo-hoo to Mitt Romney. I mean, the bottom line was he didn't want to go. He was afraid, and that's okay if you're against the war. I mean, I think the problem for Mitt Romney is the fact that he was for the war. It's one thing to be against it and say, I don't want to go. It's a different thing to say you're for it. When you want to extend U.S. forces in Afghanistan, when you didn't want to get out of Iraq, and when you essentially want to start another war in Syria, that's a whole other ballgame.
Yeah, listen, I think it's all about honesty. I think it's all about, if you're afraid to go to war, say you're afraid to go to war. I can tell you, John, right now, I'm afraid to go to war. I would have been afraid to go to any war at any time during my lifetime. And you can also be principally opposed to it. Just tell the truth about your relationship to the war of your era, and Romney has not done that. Joe Conason and John Soltz, thank you both very much for joining me tonight.
Thank you, Lawrence.
Coming up, the weirdness of Mitt Romney continues into tonight's rewrite, where you will hear him talking like a hardcore communist. He, of course, does not realize that because Mitt Romney doesn't listen to Mitt Romney either.